Day, everyone. Of course, I'm John Corstein, Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center here at the Mariners Museum and Park. And I'm really honored to be able to share this story with you all. This is actually, I picked this lecture because it's very close to 24 May, which is when this decision, as you see on this slide, when this decision, the Contraband of War decision, occurred. And it occurred on one of my favorite places in the world, Fort Monroe. So we're going to learn a lot about Ben Butler, Fort Monroe, and then what happens to these people who are called contrabands. You know, when Benjamin Franklin Butler was assigned to Fort Monroe, he wanted to immediately show the Virginians that he could do anything he wanted, go anywhere. So he actually will send troops commanded by man at the far left, John Wolcott Phelps, into the town of Hampton to close the polls, because on the 23rd of May is when they voted on the Ordinance of Secession. As a result of that, he goes in, closes the poll, come back in. There's all sorts of upset, and three men, Shepard Mallory, Frank Baker, and James Townsend. We don't know which one is which, or at least I don't. So they escaped, and when the owner sent John Baytop Carey to get them back, Butler said no, called them Contraband of War. Shocked everyone, because no one, Abraham Lincoln actually did not want to bring up slavery, because he did not want to see the last border states, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, to actually leave the Union, because they all were slave states. So, and actually his platform said, we're happy to leave slavery in place. Okay, so that's a critical thought. So anyway, here is our hero, or some people's hero, let's put it that way, Benjamin Franklin Butler. And I want to tell you that this is, of course, Fort Monroe. Notice how small it is. Back then, actually, at the top of your screen are sand dunes and marshes. Basically, the building that has smoke coming from it is the arsenal, and so this is set up to have about 2,000 soldiers and no more. You can see Old Point Comfort Light, but Winfield Scott's going to call it the key to the South, and he knew that it was the key to bringing his native state, Virginia. Winfield Scott, the general-in-chief of the U.S. Army, was born in Petersburg, Virginia, and he knew that this would enable the Federals to use the Hampton Roads anchorage for the North Atlantic Blockading Squadron, then just referred to the Atlantic Blockading Squadron. So that meant you could go anywhere, because Fort Monroe and its guns during the war, it's going to mount 179 guns. So that's, it's a powerful fort, and control the area around it. Now, as more and more soldiers arrived, you'll see the bridge. That bridge is the Phoebus Bridge that you can go on today. Of course, it's not the original, but nevertheless, that goes into what is known as Camp Hamilton. And Camp Hamilton had the excess soldiers, and so basically Fort Monroe did not have a lot of room. You see, it's dominated by the Hygeia Hotel. So Winfield Scott recognizes he's got to send a higher ranking officer down, because at the beginning of the war, we're going to see this man with a gray beard is Justin Dimmick. He's a lieutenant colonel, brevet, been in the Army since 1819. That's when he graduated from West Point. And so basically, he will be is in charge of Fort Monroe. He's the post commander Butler becomes something else. So let's go to Butler and learn a little bit about him. He's born in Deerfield, New Hampshire on 5 November 1818. His father fought during the War of 1812. He was a privateer captain. His grandfathers fought during the French and Indian War and the Revolutionary War. And so Ben Butler had this great lineage of, military personage. But Butler is actually too frail. And as you note, he had a particular strange look to his eyes. It's called cockeyed, basically. So basically, he went to Colby College, and he then passed the bar in 1840. He will basically gain this great reputation as a bold, astute, and not too scrupulous lawyer, and basically he practiced in Lowell, Massachusetts. I have one favorite story about Ben Butler. He's in one court case defending some ne'er-do-well, and he, of course, at the end, he is having his summation. He leans on the jury rail, pleading with the jurors to, find his client innocent. Well, the judge, it's his growls is, Mr. Butler, you need to not stare down and intimidate the jury. And Butler quickly turned around and cocked his head and said, "Your Honor, you can't see which way I'm looking." So anyway, that is Ben Butler. He, because of his success with the law, he becomes a very wealthy individual. He buys a mill in Lowell, Massachusetts, known as Middlesex Mill. He's on several bank boards, but he actually yearned for even greater power, and that power was Ben Butler as a member of the Democratic Party. He attended every Democratic convention. He will be elected in 1852 to the Massachusetts House of Representatives. In 1858, he's elected to the Massachusetts State Senate, and then he actually runs for governor in 1860, but he does not do very well. And so one of his political enemies, Joseph Andrews, becomes governor. Butler, nevertheless, will attend the Democratic convention when it is held in Baltimore. He will at first throw his support behind Jefferson Davis as president. Then when Jefferson Davis' star fades, he calls upon John Cabell Breckinridge to be the presidential candidate. As we know, Breckinridge will be the candidate, but the party splits, and that is going to lead to Lincoln's election. Butler believed that slavery was legal where it existed. And however, he did not believe secession was legal. And as a result of that, when the first 7 states leave the Union, he will take advantage of one thing, because he knew secession meant war. So Butler had actually joined the Massachusetts militia in 1838 as a private. By 1857, he will be Brigadier General of Massachusetts militia. And so when the war erupts, there's one person who's senior to him, and that is Franklin Pierce. So Pierce is not very effective officer, but nevertheless, Butler, because he's on these banks and he knows that Massachusetts doesn't have enough money, that they have to borrow money to equip the troops. And so he's on all these boards, and he tells everyone, you only loan money if B.F. Butler is in command of the first troops south. And so Andrews has no choice but to name Butler as commander of the 1st Brigade of Massachusetts troops. He actually, the 6th Massachusetts, as we all know, will be involved in the April 19, 1861 Baltimore riot right down there on Pratt Street. And as a result of that, Butler will, instead of going directly down to Washington by rail, the 6th Massachusetts has to fight its way through Baltimore. He will go to the head of the bay overlooking the Susquehanna Flats, and he will commandeer a steamer and go down and come into Annapolis. The USS Constitution is in the mud. They think it could be Southern sympathizers because Maryland is in an uproar. So Butler is at the bow of the ship with his sword, and it says, "It is I, B.F. Butler, here to save the Constitution." And he meant the ship, but he also inferred it was the Constitution of the United States. And actually, he's got a PR officer with him, and so that's the big news. He will occupy Annapolis. Then he will eventually occupy Baltimore, Federal Hill, if you're ever in the harbor. That's where he puts his cannon and troops, and so Baltimore cannot fight against him. Maryland maintains in the Union primarily because of the actions of B.F. Butler. Well, Butler is going to be named Major General by Abraham Lincoln, and then he is told he's going to take command at Fort Monroe. Butler says, "No, I'm not." And he says, "I'm in command now of an entire state. Why do I want to take that as a demotion?" And of course, Lincoln tells him, "Oh, whoa, wait a second. Did not mean just Fort Monroe. I meant the 60-mile radius from Fort Monroe. You are now the commander of the Department of Virginia and North Carolina." Butler says, "I'll take the job." Now, Butler didn't know at that time that the Department of Virginia and North Carolina consisted just of Fort Monroe and Phoebus, Virginia. So I don't know which lawyer was better on that case. So he comes to to Fort Monroe. Let me tell you how they described him. Butler, one British journalist said he was a stout, middle-aged man, strongly built with coarse limbs, his features indicative of great shrewdness and craft, his forehead high, the elevation being of some degree due perhaps to the want of hair, and as you can see, with a strong obliquity of vision, which may have perhaps been caused by injury, as the eyelid hangs with a pendulous droop over the organ. Oh my gosh. Now notice his fancy uniform. He continues saying, "I found him clothed in a gorgeous military uniform, adored with rich gold embroidery. His rotund form, his squinting eye, and the peculiar puffs of his cheeks made him look quite grotesque. Officers entered from time to time to make reports or ask for orders. Nothing could have been more striking than the air of authority with which the general received them, and the tone of court peculiar to the military commander on the stage. He expressed his satisfaction or discontent, and which gave him, those men, his instructions. And after every such scene, he looked around the room with a triumphal gaze, as if to assure himself that the bystanders were duly impressed." So they were. So he arrives at Fort Monroe. Off in the distance in this picture, you can see Hampton, Virginia, which is on the Hampton River. Is about a small town of about 1,000 residents. There's a small Confederate camp of instruction outside the town, led by Major John Baytop Carey, a graduate of the College of William and Mary, went to the University of Edinburgh, and he was headmaster or commandant, we should say, of the Hampton Military Academy. Now, Butler arrives on the Adelaide, Old Bay Line steamer, on May 22nd. And he actually decides on that day to break the informal truce that existed between Confederates and the Union. And so, fortunately, he has an outstanding officer, Colonel John Wolcott Phelps, a graduate of West Point class of 1836. He was a veteran of the Seminole and Mexican Wars. He was part of the Utah expedition to control the Mormons. And then he was also an ardent abolitionist. He actually threw his hat in the ring to run for president, but he didn't get much traction. Nevertheless, so what Butler does is says he's going to order Phelps to go into the town of Hampton, right, which we see back over here, and he's supposed to close the polls. So I got to tell you, this Phelps will march from Camp Hamilton towards Hampton. John Baytop Carey sees that they are coming towards Hampton, so he decides he's going to burn the Hampton River Bridge. Wow, but the trouble is, even though he had ordered combustibles to be available, he can't even find matches at first, and he can barely get the bridge on fire. Phelps put his men at double quick. He comes up and says, look, we're not here to do anything. We're going to march into town. We're going to turn around and go back. And so imagine this, the Virginia militia troops that are there, the citizens of Hampton, and the Vermonters all work together to put out the flames on the bridge. And then Phelps goes in to Hampton, and he will close the polls, which would have been at the courthouse on King Street. And so then he turns around and marches back, right? Meanwhile, Carey goes on to Fort Monroe because Benjamin Stoddard Ewell, Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Stoddard Ewell, 32, graduate of West Point, brother to the more famous Ewell, and basically he's also the president of the College of William and Mary. So he goes on to Fort Monroe. He's captured. Carey wants to go free him, so he works with Butler. Ewell is freed. They go back into Hampton. And so basically, that was kind of a peaceful interaction. But his reconnoitering exhibition achieved really nothing. However, everyone gets excited. And so, Carey asked Butler on the 23rd, how far he intended to take possession of Virginia soil in order that I might act in a manner as to avoid collision between our scouts. Butler says, we need some more land for all of our troops, and I can take whatever land I want, but I'm not going to, cause a battle, at this time. So during all the confusion of the Vermonters coming in, the citizens were terrified by these men. I mean, Phelps is 6'4", right? He's got this big hat with the ostrich plume hanging from it. And they said when he's marching down Broadway to get on boats to go south, he will actually, one bystander says, who is that big Vermont colonel? And one person said, he is Ethan Allen resurrected. All his men have evergreen sprigs in their hats, so wow, they're very impressive, well-trained, and so forth. So that causes all this confusion. So meanwhile, the Confederates are building fortifications to guard the entrance to the Elizabeth River, particularly at Sewell's Point and Craney Island. and they have Major General Walter Gwynn, also a West Pointer, class of 24. He is known as the father of the Southern Railway Network. He will impress enslaved people to help build these fortifications. And so basically, three of these impressed people are enslaved by a man known as Colonel Charles King Mallory. Mallory Street in Hampton is named for him. He is so three of his enslaved people are going to actually row a boat back, but instead of going back into Hampton, what do? They take advantage of all the confusion and go on to Fort Monroe, and they ask for their freedom. Oh my gosh. This is a big deal. Now, this is the decision right there. These three men are Shepard Mallory, Frank Baker, and James Townsend. And so these men say, well, we want to be free. You know, you're the Union. This war's about us. So will you free us? And of course, Lincoln had not issued any policy, so Butler's kind of on his own. However, being such a shrewd lawyer, he is considering what to do. In the meantime, guess who comes? Yes, John Baytop Carey. Now he's 6'2". Butler is 5'6". Carey is at FFV and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, he comes and sees Butler and says he demands the return of Colonel Mallory's property using the fugitive slave law as justification. Butler, realizing that these three men had been used to build Confederate fortifications, and that he refused Carey's request. Basically, he said, now, since Virginia considered herself an independent nation, his constitutional obligations were null and void. Butler further noted that since Virginia has left the Union, since Virginia had declared itself an independent state and yet to join the Confederacy on the state, they will basically, he says, well, you know, Virginia is at war with the United States. So as a result of that, he will say he has the ability to take possession of any property relating to the building of fortifications and the defense of Virginia. These three men are doing exactly that. And so he calls them Contraband of War. Now, this is shocking. Carey leaves without the enslaved people. And I'll tell you very quickly, more and more people will try and come on to Fort Monroe. Now, this is mythical, this image right here. And I'll tell you why. Fort Monroe can only hold about 2,000 men. And so that's why they created Camp Hamilton. Actually, there are, by the end of May, there are just 12 contrabands inside the fort. Actually, I have to tell you that I'll tell a story about that there's an eyewitness that talks about them. But nevertheless, this, even though President Lincoln never mentions this contraband of war, he doesn't approve it, doesn't deny it, but it was changing the Civil War, the War of the Rebellion, as Congress called it in 1866, said that, oh my gosh, you know, everyone thinks this is a war between the states, but now, because of the Contraband of War decision, it becomes a war about freedom, right? And that is so critical, that Ben Butler recognized the economic and political implications of the Contraband of War decision. Instead of those enslaved people working for the Confederacy on the farms, building fortifications, etc., they now could work for the Union. And so therefore, that decision is going to injure the Southern war effort in a certain way. So he took a Southern asset and turned it into a Union benefit. And so he thought that using the initial contrabands as for work on fortifications and so forth. He thought that was a fair trade for the food and shelter provided for them. Now, this is often called the Butler's Fugitive Slave Law. Lincoln never openly embraced it. However, the radical Republicans in Congress did. And on 16 August 1861, Congress formally approved Butler's decision when the Confiscation Act was passed. The act confiscated any slave who had been used for military service against the United States. This act is going to lead to other contraband camps being created as wherever the Union went, particularly at Port Royal Sound. That becomes known as the Port Royal experiment, excuse me. And then also on Roanoke Island, there's a major colony of contrabands. Now, why do we call them contrabands? You see, they're not really free, but they believe themselves to be free, right? And eventually they will codify their work. And actually, as Butler says, on the 27th of May, he says there are 12 slaves that had escaped from Sewell's Point to become contrabands, and their value exceeded $60,000. He then says, I quote, "The Negroes came pouring in day by day." Butler wrote, "I found work for them to do, classified them, and made a list of them so their identity might be fully assured." And he appointed a commissioner of Negro affairs. So the fort was not designed for so many people. So there is a camp created, initially called Slabtown. I think you all might know where the National Cemetery is in Phoebus, Virginia, between that church that's there at the intersection of Woodland Road and County Street, that church, and moving down Woodland Road, and also moving down Old Buckrow Road, and that's known as the Slabtown Camp. That's the first encampment for contrabands. And so this scene did not really happen, but the news of the decision rapidly went through the local African-American community. When Butler occupies Newport News Point, what is he going to do? He is going to actually build two commodious pine log buildings to house the contrabands that are coming to Newport News Point, which is called Camp Butler. Now, as soon as the news reaches the North about this decision, they are going to be, many people are just so enthused by it, especially the American Missionary Association. This is a philanthropic organization that is made of a bunch of northern do-gooders who wanted to spread the word of Christianity throughout the world, and they knew they could do so by teaching everybody to read and write English, because then they could read the Bible. They are actually Armstrong, the founder of Hampton University, Samuel Champlin Armstrong, will be born in Hawaii because his parents are members of the AMA. So he's the only general born in Hawaii that served during the War of the Rebellion. So anyway, so Reverend Oliver is one of the first ones to come down, and he later remembered that passing by the fortress chapel and adjacent yard where most of the contraband tents were set, one young man sat on the edge of a rude seat with a little book in his hand. It had been much fingered, and he was stooping down towards the dim blaze of the fire to make out the words. Where he had learned to read, I know not, but where some of his companions will learn to read, I do know. Reverend Lewis C. Lockwood will note with joy that these contrabands have a great thirst for knowledge. Parents and children are delighted with the idea of learning to read. Why? Well, since Nat Turner's rebellion, Nat Turner was a mystic preacher and unschooled, but he knew how to read and write. He read the Bible, he led that great rebellion. In the aftermath of the rebellion, after a debate in the General Assembly, which almost ended slavery in Virginia, instead it established these harsh slave codes, one of which was that those enslaved people of African descent could not learn how to read and write. So this is one big violation of the rules. So several people are going to work to lead certain schools. Mary Peak was actually born in Norfolk in 1823. She was a free black. Her father was an English sea captain. She will marry and eventually move to Hampton, where she has a house. She works as a dressmaker and seamstress, but also at night, she taught the local African Americans how to read and write. This is a violation of the slave codes, but no one seemed to care. When the war broke out, she teaches her first class under the Emancipation Oak. The AMA will actually hire her. They will erect what is known as Brown's Cottage, and that is where she will teach until she dies from tuberculosis in February of 1862. So Mary Peak is very noted for, one of the first teachers of Africa. These are the first African-American schools, basically, in the South. So you have to realize what an impact it had. Now, other schools were created. Peter Herbert, who was the caretaker of former President John Tyler's home, known as Villa Margaret. Tyler had recently died. His wife, Julia Gardner Tyler, says she wanted to keep the scum of the streets of Boston away from her home. She is ignored. And so Peter Herbert sets up a school in the basement for contrabands. So one-room schoolhouses with one teacher teaching all the subjects, which anywhere from 50 to 100 pupils. Mary Peak actually had taught during the day about 50 to 60 pupils. At night, she taught about 20 to 30 adults, all how to read and write. Now, if you're a contraband, what else are you going to do? Number one, I got my freedom. Number two, I'm learning to read and write. And number three, I want to be able to fight against slavery and free my brethren. So basically, they can't join the U.S. Army at this time, but they can join the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy had a colorblind enlistment policy. Well, it actually didn't have it was unwritten policy. So about 10% or so of the U.S. Navy had been African American prior to the war. Now, they were all free blacks, and they actually, during the Civil War, it's estimated anywhere between 15 and 20% of naval personnel enlisted personnel will be African Americans. There are 8 that receive the Medal of Honor. Many of those 8 are what? Contraband of War. Now, I got to tell you that there are several comments that people make about those contrabands that joined the Navy. 16 formerly enslaved people of African descent made up the entire crew of the USS Minnesota's aft pivot gun crew. As the steam screw frigate's commander, Captain Gershon Jacques Henry Van Brunt he praised his gun crew after their service during the capture of Hatteras Inlet, and he was saying that this is in official records of the War of the Rebellion, the Negroes fought energetically, bravely, none more so. They evidently felt they were working on the deliverance of their own race. Wow. Several contrabands actually find their way onto, that's Mary Peak. And this is the schoolhouse that's going to be built in 1863, known as the Butler School. He will use U.S. Army dollars to build this school. So, the schools are expanding. Here you go. This is a view of the USS Miami. You can see the African-American sailors there. So I can't tell you whether these are contrabands or not, but we do know that crews of ships like the USS Hunchback had almost 50% of their crew were African-American enlisted men. So that's a pretty big deal. And actually, contrabands find their way onto the crew of the Monitor. Crew member number 53 is going to be a man known as Siah Carter. Carter is his slave name. His real name is Hewlett, which he'll use later. He escapes from Shirley Plantation. His enslaver, Colonel Hill Carter, warned all of his enslaved people that if they went on board any of those Yankee ships then cruising on the James River, don't do that, because the Yankees would carry them out to sea and throw them overboard. When the Monitor was anchored off of Shirley Plantation in the James River, Siah made his decision. There's decisions, processes that have to be made. And he saw the ship, and so he steals a little skiff. He rows out. As he approaches the Monitor, they do the battle rattle, basically. And so all the crew members come to quarters. They all are pointing their guns at this one black man, Siah Carter, and he says, "Don't shoot, I'm here to be with you." And so he's named ship member. They enlist him that very day, and he will be named, there's Siah Carter right there in the forefront of this picture. Basically, we will see that he becomes a first-class ship's boy, which is a rank used for both white and black. So there's no negative connotation be calling a first-class boy. Okay, just to clarify that. So, what are the Southerners going to do about all this? Well, I have to tell you, they are not pleased. And so John Bankhead Magruder, Brigadier General John Bankhead Magruder, fresh from his victory at Big Bethel on June 10, 1861, is in command of what's called the Army of the Peninsula. He will actually bring 5,000 men down towards Camp Butler to kind of try to make the Union come out of camp to attack him. Well, I have to tell you, on the August 6, 1861, we will see that they come across a picket post that had been abandoned. There they find a copy of the New York Tribune, and basically they gave it to Magruder because the newspaper contained an article stating that Butler intended to use Hampton to house contrabands and Union soldiers. Well, determined not to allow Hampton to be used by the Federals for winter quarters or to become the harbor of runaway slaves and traders, Magruder realized that the town's proximity to Fort Monroe meant he could not defend it. So, Governor General, with the agreement of local soldiers, will plan to burn Hampton. And on the evening of 7 August 1861, Confederate soldiers rushed through the town, mostly the Old Dominion Dragoons. The Warwick Beauregards are stationed at the bridge, which had been burned, but nevertheless, to stop any Union from disrupting this. So one member of the Old Dominion Dragoons, Sergeant Robert S. Hudgens II, he will recount the scene. As the smoke ascended toward the heavens, I was reminded of the ancient sacrifices to the altar to many deities, and I thought how my little hometown was being made a sacrifice to the grim god of war. Well, the next day, Hampton was a smoldering scene of bleak forests of burnt chimneys and heaps of smoldering ruins. Nevertheless, upon these ashes, the grand Contraband Camp will be created almost immediately. It's also called Slab Town because the African Americans will build this. Is the burning of Hampton, as you can see. And this is the grand Contraband Camp. They called it Slab Town also because it's built on the foundations of those old houses. Hampton, oldest English-speaking community in North America. You can see that chimney in the white clapboard house actually is an original chimney. Okay, so, and you can see a couple others when you look through this picture. So this is the Grand Contraband Camp. They also will basically rebuild this town. That's why still today we have a Lincoln Street in Hampton. And so basically, they create the largest school for African Americans because they take the courthouse, the Elizabeth City Courthouse on King Street in Hampton. In fact, there's one original wall, and they take that and turn it in to the largest contraband school in the South at the time. Okay, so this is really big, just tremendous news, I have to say. So Fort Monroe has played this critical role in trying to basically not only maintain the Hampton Roads anchorage, but also to expand the concepts of freedom and try to share them with all those enslaved people within the Peninsula region. And actually, they did come from York County, James City County, Hanover County, believe it or not, all came down to Hampton and Newport News Point, which was then part of Elizabeth City County, believe it or not. And so they will make their homes. So these are thousands of people that have come. Hundreds join the U.S. Navy. We can I can count, well, there are 8 African Americans on the Monitor. 6 of them were contrabands. And you can learn about them by reading my book, The Monitor Boys. I just thought I'd throw that out. So what's going to happen? Well, Abraham Lincoln will actually visit Fort Monroe and Hampton in May of 1862. He actually gets to meet some contraband. He understands, what this war is truly all about. So in July, he will work with William Seward to write the Emancipation Proclamation, which will be released on September 22, 1862. And then on January 1st, 1863, it is made law. Now, the first reading of the Emancipation Proclamation in the South is going to occur under the Emancipation. Oh, whoops, I don't want to go there yet. There you go. And you can go there today. And so many of the students all congregated under the boughs of this tree, and they were read the Emancipation Proclamation. They weren't read the last part because the Emancipation Proclamation actually freed people in Confederate territory, still in rebellion. If it was under Union control, they were not freed. And in fact, those contrabands were still property, although they all knew they weren't property because they had escaped into Union lines. They were having jobs. They were also being able to serve their nation, because also with the Emancipation Proclamation, you had the Militia Act, and the Militia Act is going to enable contrabands, as you see in this triptych on the left, and there the contraband becomes what? A USCT, a United States Colored Troops. And he will actually, there are several units that were formed on the peninsula. Several of those regiments serve at the Crater, also at the Battle of Newmarket Heights. And so where we will see 12 African Americans receive the Medal of Honor. And so then you see the final view of the triptych. There, the soldier had honorably served, lost his leg in the crusade, as some people say, to end slavery, which the War of the Rebellion certainly does. You know, I've been to this place many, many times, and when you are under that tree, you get the real sense of what the meaning of freedom happens to be. A sapling from this tree was given to President Obama, and he planted it on the White House lawn. This is considered by National Geographic as one of the 10 greatest trees in the world. So that makes it pretty important. So the Contraband of War decision, what does it mean? It's the first steps towards making the war between the states into a war for freedom. And that is a huge step for the nation. And Ben Butler, only Ben Butler, that crafty lawyer, let me tell you, he was a sharpster. He was a slickster. He was a politically minded at all times. He wanted to be a general. Why? Because he wanted to be president of the United States. He actually runs one time. He doesn't get it, of course. How'd you like to see Butler on the $5 bill, you know, because you could move it and to check if it's counterfeit by the way the eye looks. I don't know. But nevertheless, Butler is crafty. Butler is always seeking his own to rise, his own self-esteem, his own grandeur. He will actually, they have torch lit parades in honor of Butler throughout the North. First, when he occupies Maryland, and second, when he comes up with the Contraband of War decision. This is what the abolitionists wanted. That's why the American Missionary Association comes down. That's why they set up the schools. That's why they open up enlistment. And so that those people who had found freedom were able to work towards the freedom of their brethren. So anyway, that's the Contraband of War decision. If you all have any questions, I'm kind of ready for them, I guess.
Thank you, John. That was fabulous as always. Before we go to questions, I don't think you showed Mary Peak or the Butler School, and I want people to see.
I did. I did show them.
Show Mary Peak?
Yeah, because she's right. There's Butler School, and there's Mary Peak.
Okay, well, I missed her. I just wanted to make sure we showed her because she looks like such a dear lady, and her eyes speak volumes. So thank you for showing her.
Yes. And I showed the Butler School. I actually told the story. It was built with federal funds, even though it was for the American Missionary Association. That because Butler comes back to Fort Monroe, and he then becomes commander of the Army of the James. It is his 1/3 of his army were African Americans, or USCT. He's in overall command at the Battle of Newmarket Heights on September 29, 1864, where 12 African Americans will receive the Medal of Honor.
Right. Okay. Well, sorry, I must have been
sleeping.
No, not that. Just gazing elsewhere. But we do have some questions.
Okay.
Fernando from Venezuela, which we're happy to have him back with us today, asked, do you think Abraham Lincoln historically was a man against slavery, but he knew and learned strategy and tactics during the Civil War so that he was conscious he needed to preserve slave states' loyalty to the Union at the same beginning of the war, was in favor of what Butler did in his mind and heart, but he could not say it at the moment?
He makes no statement about the Contraband of War decision. I know he was very worried about the border states. However, the radical Republicans, Lincoln was a shrewd politician, because he was actually a congressman for 2 years. He was a great lawyer, one of the leading lawyers in Illinois. He actually worked for the Illinois Central Railroad, a contract lawyer, and his boss was none other than later Major General George Britton McClellan. Oh my God, they didn't get along very well, but that's okay. The bottom line is that I would believe that Lincoln felt that slavery was an odious stain on America. He publicly said that he was willing to maintain slavery where it existed at that time, but he did not want to see the expansion of slavery. And that was one of the big issues, westward expansion, that led to this conflict. The Southerners, those slave owners, leading politicians, all thought that unless we have more slave states, we're going to be outvoted one day in Congress and the Senate, and that will mean slavery will be eliminated. Because, you know, Mexico eliminated slavery in 1824 as soon as they kicked out the Spanish. So it was Lincoln's opinion becomes very, very clear that, you know, the Contraband of War decision was great. It was great because he knew every slave that left the farm and joined the Union effort to maintain the Union, that weakened the South and increased the power of the Union. He actually is a big supporter of the Militia Act, so that those African Americans could serve where? You know, on not just ships, but also in the army. And because of prejudice and so forth, they create the United States colored troops. The highest rank one could arrange would be sergeants. And but they actually, the guys, many of the people that receive the Medal of Honor are going to really achieve great things. And so it's at Newark Heights, one man, William Gardner, is going to bayonet a Confederate officer, capture the Confederate flag. Actually, that scene is painted. And after the war, what does he do? He comes back home to the Peninsula, and he will be actually one of the founders of Bayshore Beach, which was the first African American resort. So anyway,
You're
there
going
you
to
have
give
it.
a
I could
lecture
go
about
on.
those resorts.
Pardon?
You're giving a lecture about those resorts in July.
I am.
Yes, you are.
Okay, good.
Some more questions.
Yes.
Paul from Pittsburgh is asking, what battery did Butler have set up on Federal Hill in Baltimore in April 1861?
Well, he just took his cannon field pieces. He didn't have any heavy cannon. You had heavy cannon at Fort McHenry, but if you know where Fort McHenry sits, it had 15-inch Rodmans by this time and 11-inch Rodmans, which are still there. Those are not from the War of 1812, those cannon. They are from the War of the Rebellion, but they don't have the effective range to control Baltimore. But Federal Hill, as you all know, is the highest piece of property in Baltimore. It looks down on the harbor. It looks down on the inner city. And so even a field piece with a range of 1.5 miles could wreak havoc. And the Baltimoreans were not organized, even though there were many leading secessionists in Baltimore. That was a place they could not attack and capture because they were not organized. And so Federal Hill is, you know, so Butler just has to be there, basically. So he doesn't build fortifications overnight. He moves at a rainy thunderstorm night, actually. And so no one knows he's there. And actually he hops on a train that looks like it's heading towards Frederick, but then he backs it up and goes to Baltimore, comes into Camden Yards. You all know where that is and how close it is to Federal Hill, marches his men up top, and then issues a proclamation that he's already printed. You know, Butler's here and he's staying here. You are no longer able to follow your desires to be to leave the Union.
Stephanie and David ask, did Butler interact with any of the contrabands before making this decision? Did he interact with any of the enslaved people that poured into Fort Monroe? When did he create the Butler Medal?
Okay,
Was
well,
there
so
a particular act?
Okay, let me just tell you about this.
Okay.
Number one, he didn't meet any contraband because there are no contraband until he says they are on May 24th, 1861. So those three people, Shepard Mallory, Frank Townsend, and James Townsend, and Frank Baker, will actually be the first contraband. So did he have any interaction with people of African descent at that time? There's no record of it, so I can't say. But I do know Theodore Winthrop, who's in that image. Let me go back to this. One of my favorite images of the Civil War. You can actually go to this very room. It's in quarters number 1, we believe, on old quarters number 1 on Fort Monroe. Theodore Winthrop is the person with the pen. He actually writes an article for the Atlantic Monthly about this decision and describes contrabands, describes their first camp, and the whole scene. So this decision is so well documented. Winthrop is actually a brilliant writer, a graduate of Yale. He actually is a descendant of the Winthrop, who was governor of Massachusetts in the the 17th century. So he's got a great lineage. He will actually be a major. He will be shot through the heart at the Battle of Big Bethel. So, but he is an eyewitness to the beginning of that transition of the Civil War. Now, as to the Butler Medal, I think that's the next part of the question. The Butler Medal was established on September 30th, 1862. It's made of silver. There are 90 of them. Some people believe there are 10 made of bronze, but I've never seen one. The Virginia War Museum, which I was director of for 30 years, not too far from the Mariners Museum, will actually has a Butler Medal. I remember acquiring that. And so you can actually go and see the original medal. He felt that he could approve Medal of Honors for everyone who had done such sterling duty during the Battle of Newmarket Heights. So he goes out and makes these medals himself at his own expense. Now, everyone kind of laughs with that because Butler's nickname was Spoons, or Silver Spoons Butler, because when he's in command at New Orleans, he sends his troops out and with the cotton agent, Andrew Butler, brother to Ben Butler. And so when they go out, they capture all this cotton, one bale for the Union, one bale for the Butler family, and also going into the plantation houses, they would steal the silver. And so that is one of the kind of jokes of the Civil War, that was probably Confederate owned silver at one time, or you could almost make that case. I can't prove it. And but it's kind of nice considering what they call Spoons Butler. Actually, I helped the Casemate Museum acquire his mess chest, which you can go see in the Casemate Museum. And everything's there except for the spoons, and I don't. And it's sterling, or it's coin silver, actually.
The missing spoons. Okay.
The missing spoons. I wish I had one.
Paul asked, how much did Butler's Contraband Declaration advance the cause of emancipation versus other actions, i.e., radical Republican politics, etc.?
Well, you remember, Butler was a Democrat. He's now a radical Republican. At this moment in time, he changes everything. So I think his decision emboldens the other radical Republicans to lobby for emancipation. In fact, they wanted at the beginning of the war, Lincoln to say this war is about ending slavery. Lincoln says, oh no, because he's worried about the border states. So I have to say that this is such a seminal act that is a change agent for the War of the Rebellion. And so I have to say that this is stands out. It's codified in the Confiscation Act, right? August 61. What happens a year and a half later is the Emancipation Proclamation. Actually, Lincoln is going to conceive, already is thinking about it, but he conceives it after his trip down, and he actually sees contraband. So that is a huge, huge issue, I think. So the Contraband of War decision is a change agent, as I said.
You might not have been back to your Virginia War Museum lately, Don, but Paul says that he loved the African American history section, the military room, and is it still there?
I don't know.
Either.
I don't think the museum has changed much since I left, and I left there in 2008. But we, one of the things I used to do was raise money. Now I don't have to anymore. So that's good. All I have to do is talk about history and write about history, Civil War. I'm now really, been reading so many pages of the official records of the War of the Rebellion. I'm now calling it the War of the Rebellion because I view that as an official title, at least by act of Congress. Now, so yes, I'm pretty sure it's there. It is a very powerful item, and it's only about that big. And it don't have, the ribbon didn't survive. So, but you can see a picture of several of the veterans of the Battle of Newmarket Heights. And you can see some of them have both medals on their chest. So that's like, wow,
And that's your lecture in September.
What is?
Battle of Newmarket Heights.
Okay, then I know about that battle.
Okay, good. John, advance to the last slide, if you will, so people have that contact information.
Okay, so if you got further questions, you can email me. That's not a picture of me. I'm glad. And of course, you can get my books through the museum's gift shop, which you can access through our website and so forth, or you can come to the museum. We open today to the public. Huzzah!
Not to the public yet. Get donors and supporters today. Okay, well, next Friday.
Okay, well, I was close.
But yes, so, and so we want people to know they can order online or come see us and get a signed copy in the gift shop. Next Friday, John will be speaking at noon on the origins and meanings of Decoration Day. I promise you he covers both sides of the War of the Rebellion. Pictures to show paying homage from both sides of the conflict.
Julie, because the big issue is in the South they call it Memorial Day. Mm-hmm. In the North they call it Decoration Day. Mm-hmm. But both Decoration Day and Memorial Day are about laying flowers on the graves, respect for the killed. The first Memorial Day in the South is in Charleston by a group of ladies, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. The North starts doing Decoration Day thanks to the leadership of Major General John Alexander Logan, who's also a senator. So it's fabulous. And, I always remembered it as a holiday because it was, the official beginning of summer, and I was a lifeguard for 7 years at Fort Monroe. So like it has a lot of different types of meaning to me. So yes, it's going to be a nice talk, and I'm going to write a very simple blog about it just to document how this thing evolved, because there are some dates that show us it does not become a national holiday. I think it's not till 71 or 75, but
for us girls in the South, it means we can wear white shoes and pocketbooks.
And I get to wear seersucker jackets.
There you go. So it has all kinds of meanings.
Yes.
For those of you that are interested in further activities this weekend, it's at Fort Monroe. There's a 2-day seminar that will be live streamed. If you get the Daily Press, it's the front page story today, but their activities about the Contraband, sorry, the decision about the Contrabands. They have 2 days of programming, which will be live streamed after they happen on their Facebook and YouTube channels at Fort Monroe. So just wanted to point that out for those of you that are interested. There's lots going on over there, and check out what's happening across the creek here in Hampton at Fort Monroe. But we thank you all for being with us. We look forward to seeing you in the museum. We will continue doing these virtual programs, so fear not, so that we can speak with those of you in Venezuela and England and elsewhere. So with that, we say goodbye and have a fabulous weekend. Look forward to seeing you next Friday. And thank you, John.
And just remember to sink before surrender. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.